A very warm welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Linda Kincaid, in for Issa Suarez. Tonight, President-elect Trump's rollout of contentious cabinet picks continues, with allies pushing for controversial Republican Kash Patel to head the FBI. Plus, Trump picks vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services as the Trump team braces for confirmation fights over some cabinet picks. And heavy strikes continue in Lebanon as diplomatic efforts to end the Israel-Hezbollah war intensify. We'll have the latest. Well, the author of a book Donald Trump called A Roadmap to End the Deep State's Reign is reportedly being considered to lead the FBI. CNN has learned that the president-elect is weighing whether to fire FBI Chief Christopher Wray and replace him with fierce loyalist Kash Patel. Right-wing allies are reportedly making a push for Patel, who is a former Defense Department official. Patel has long repeated baseless claims about intelligence agencies unlawfully targeting Donald Trump. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he wants to make America healthy again. But critics say Donald Trump's choice for Health and Human Services Secretary could be a prescription for disaster. Kennedy has a history of being an anti-vaxxer, falsely claiming, for example, that vaccines cause cancer. If confirmed, he'll oversee the agencies that regulate food and medicine here in the U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he will strongly suggest that an ethics committee report on Trump's pick for Attorney General not be released. Gaetz resigned his seat just before the committee was due to unveil its findings over allegations of sex trafficking against him. He denies any wrongdoing. Well, let's take a closer look at some of Donald Trump's selections with CNN's Tom Foreman. Good to see you, Tom. So let's start with Gaetz. So the House Ethics Committee was meant to meet today about Matt Gaetz, who is, of course, accused of sex trafficking and sex with a minor. Of course, he denies those. But the Ethics Committee canceled that after he was named or picked to be Donald Trump's Attorney General to lead the Justice Department. What is the Ethics Committee saying about why they canceled that meeting?
Well, it wasn't because he was picked. It's because he resigned his seat. Because normally the committee says, hey, we only oversee members of Congress. The minute he resigns, he's no longer a member of Congress. He's on his way. Well, that's enough for the Speaker of the House, apparently, who says, well, we're not going to break that precedent. It'd be a terrible precedent to break that. Members of the Senate, both Republican and Democrat, are saying, no. This is much too important of a decision for us to not have the information from this report. We should be able to see it in some fashion. Now, could there be some kind of release that was done privately, not made generally available to the public? I suppose, although it's my belief that this report will wind up in public hands somehow or another anyway. But we'll find out if that's the case. But that's the rationale for all of this. But it's a measure of how exercised this town is right now about Trump's picks, which in a broad consensus, have been wild.
Yeah, wild, highly controversial. And we are hearing, Tom, that Donald Trump is trying to avoid these confirmation hearings and also FBI background checks. Well, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, he certainly can. FBI background checks have been a normal part of how this is done because we don't want the country exposed to people who may have troublesome things in their background, who may be somehow vulnerable to being leveraged by some other countries everywhere. It's been a normal thing to protect the country. But what seems very, very clear in the Trump approach to all of this is he has never liked being hampered by tradition, never liked being hampered by rules or laws. He wants to just do it his way. He knows that if they go through with these checks, as they did his first time around, some of these people may suddenly not look like people he can put in place the way he wants, all throughout his staff. So he wants to put them in and basically says, I don't want anything to do with this. They've talked about using private firms to do the background checks. I mean, honestly, I think lots and lots of people will say, private firms, yeah, we know what that means. They'll rubber stamp what you want and give it some facade of looking at it. But the bottom line is, if you look across the board at what the people Trump has picked here, there are people who, like Kash Patel, who we're hearing some possibilities about, are totally committed to sort of dismantling Washington and the operations of Washington as we know, totally committed to trying to dismantle any vestige of the history of prosecutions against Donald Trump and wrongdoing that he's been accused of and convicted of. They'd like to get rid of all of that. And third part, the one thing we know Donald Trump has campaigned on and has loved through most of his life: revenge. The notion of these people being instruments of him going after the folks that made him uncomfortable and made him feel as if he was a criminal, which of course now he is convicted of being. So these are very, very unusual days in Washington.
Yeah, exactly. As Kamala Harris said on the campaign trail, he might be starting his enemies list right now as he picks these various people for his cabinet. Good to have you with us, Tom Foreman. Thank you.
Good chatting.
Well, there are new questions today about the scope of influence Elon Musk could have in the new Trump administration following a secret meeting the Tesla billionaire may have had with a top Iranian official. The New York Times is reporting that Musk met earlier this week with Iran's ambassador to the UN. The paper's report cited two Iranian officials who said that the discussion was focused on ways to try to ease the decades-long tensions between the two nations. A U.S. official telling CNN that the Biden administration was not made aware of that meeting. And Jared Kushner is once again expected to play an important role in the Middle East policy for the Trump administration. Some regional diplomats and Trump allies tell CNN that Trump's son-in-law is not likely to take on a formal position, but will probably serve as an outsider Middle East advisor. An Israeli source says Kushner developed and maintained friendships with leaders throughout the region, areas where he has significant financial interests. He played a major role in forging the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Well, diplomatic efforts to end the Israel-Hezbollah war are intensifying today. Sources telling CNN that Hezbollah is considering a joint U.S.-Israeli ceasefire proposal that was relayed to the Lebanese government. But even amid those efforts, Israel is keeping up airstrikes on Lebanon, targeting southern Beirut for the fourth straight day. A state-run media in Syria also reports that new Israeli attacks are happening in Damascus, a day after an Israeli strike reportedly killed 15 people in the capital, including women and children. Well, a special UN committee has found that Israel's warfare in Gaza is consistent with the characteristics of genocide. It accuses Israel of intentionally causing mass civilian casualties and using starvation as a weapon of war. The committee is expected to present the report to the UN General Assembly on Monday. CNN is reaching out to Israel for comment. The U.S. State Department says unequivocally it disagrees with the report. Melissa Bell is following all these developments and joins us tonight from Paris. Good to have you with us, Melissa. So let's start with those airstrikes in Lebanon for the fourth day in a row. It's not only costing lives, but of course livelihoods. We did hear from the World Bank today, estimating that the war there has cost Lebanon $8.5 billion. What more can you tell us?
In a country, remember, Linda, where the economy was already on its knees before Israel opened up this second front a few months ago, those strikes have continued, fresh evacuation orders in some Beirut suburbs. But the last few days have been particularly violent. On Thursday alone, 48 civilians were killed in a building that collapsed there in Beirut. More than 40 people were killed. So a particularly brutal few days. The airstrikes have been fairly incessant, we're told, for a few days. So a great deal more military pressure, even as what we understand is that efforts are gearing up towards the possibility of a ceasefire along that front. What we know is that the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon has handed to the Lebanese government a ceasefire proposal, Linda, drawn up on behalf of Israel and the United States. The idea that if it's accepted by the Lebanese government and Hezbollah in particular, it would mean a 60-day ceasefire, and it is hoped, if that held, a more lasting peace along the basis of the lines of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that had been drawn up at the end of the 2006 conflict. So there is some hope that, given its state after the decapitation of its leadership and all that it's been through over the last few months, that Hezbollah might choose to accept this deal, and certainly for the wider country and its civilians, that would be good news. The Israeli government, of course, under huge pressure from its people, and specifically, Linda, those in the northern part of the country that have lived between those rockets going back and forth and that violence now for many months. 60,000 of them displaced. They would be allowed to get home. And the Netanyahu administration has been under pressure not just to get a hostage deal for Gaza, but under substantial pressure to bring peace to the north of Israel. So this fresh deal could bring that to all of these sides, and there is hope that could lead to an agreement. The question now, if it happens and it is agreed by the Lebanese government, when a ceasefire might be implemented. Would it happen during the last few weeks of the Biden administration, or indeed even as Donald Trump came into power? Linda.
All right, Melissa Belforis, live tonight for us from Paris. Thanks so much. Well, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has urged Russia's president to withdraw from Ukraine. Mr. Scholz held his first phone call with Vladimir Putin since 2022. This amid fears that the US will pull its support for Ukraine under a new Trump White House. Scholz, who initiated the call, condemned Russian aggression towards Ukraine and urged for peace talks. The Kremlin says any agreement would have to recognize what it calls new territorial realities. Well, Reuters reports that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned Scholz about speaking with Mr. Putin, saying it would help the Russian president by reducing his isolation. Well, let's talk more about how U.S. foreign policy might change under Trump's upcoming administration. We're joined by Ravi Agrawal, the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine. Great to have you with us.
Pleasure.
So certainly a lot of ground to cover today, but I want to start with what you highlighted before the election. You said this is what is at stake: the fate of Ukraine, peace in the Middle East, competition with China, and the broader question of America's role in the world. When we look at the people that Trump has selected or picked so far for his cabinet, overall, what does that selection tell you?
Well, there are a range of interesting characters that we're learning about. Some of the selections are China hawks. So you look at Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor. They are demonstrated China hawks who have a long history of, a tough rhetoric on China, wanting to reorient U.S. foreign policy to be tougher on China. Now, the question is, how much leeway will they actually have from Trump to exercise that agenda versus, Trump's other priorities, whether it is more tariffs on China, whether it is, maybe even striking some sort of a deal with China. Remember, one thing that's very interesting to look out for with Trump 2.0 is that we have someone who is not an appointee in Elon Musk, who has immense sway, who's been on phone calls with Zelensky in Ukraine. He met the Iranians in New York. He's showing up with Trump to lots of meetings, has significant interests in China. So there's a lot that we don't know. Where I'm more comfortable going is what we do know. We do know that Trump, unlike Biden, is much more transactional. He doesn't care so much about multilateralism. He cares about bilateral relationships. He cares about explaining what's in it for me in every single deal. He is certainly going to increase tariffs in a way that could be very disruptive for the economy. He is going to deport some number of illegal immigrants in the United States, which again could have immense economic implications. And then with the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, I actually think there won't be as much difference as people are imagining. But Ukraine, of course, is an area that Europe is worried about because they really want and need American support.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, Donald Trump has tapped Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence. This is the person who has zero experience in intelligence and hasn't served on any sort of intelligence committee. She has, though, been accused of parroting Russian propaganda. What sort of reaction are you seeing to that? And what does that suggest about the way Trump may view and handle Ukraine and the Russian invasion going forward?
So I'd like to take those two things separately. I think we have a sense of how Trump is going to handle the war in Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard specifically, her appointment, I think, speaks badly to the fact that she has no intelligence experience, as you said. And this is a huge job, Director of National Intelligence, which includes command of 18 intelligence agencies. It includes ability to access all kinds of classified information, and there is a reasonable chance that all the people who work under her are going to feel like they have a leader in her who doesn't understand what they do, who doesn't understand the risks and the trade-offs involved, and doesn't have the best track record with classified information. All of that is, of a piece with the Trump administration and is stuff to worry about. But on Ukraine, I think, no matter who won the election on November 5, there was going to be some big push towards some sort of change, whether it's a deal, whether it's a momentum shift. And I think with Trump, he doesn't want to lose. This is a person who, doesn't want what happened in Afghanistan to happen in Ukraine. So there will be some sort of peace deal. The question is on what terms and whether Trump cares at all about Ukraine's future. So if the conflict is frozen where it is right now and Ukraine retains the territory it currently controls, who actually defends it? Does it get to join NATO? And I think that's where Trump could be pivotal and maybe not in a good way.
And it's interesting his pick for Defense Secretary, a Fox News personality, Pete Hegseth, who we know in 2019 successfully lobbied Trump to pardon 3 service members who were convicted or accused of war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. How is that, the fact that Donald Trump has named him to head up the Defense Department, are you hearing that is of concern to other nations around the world?
It is of concern, but I think, again, if you look at the common thread between all the people that Trump is nominating, especially for national security and foreign policy roles, they are all loyalists. That is the most important trait they have in common. And that means that Trump actually has a lot more power than you would imagine. A lot of these agencies are meant to be nonpartisan. I mean, especially the CIA or the DNI, for example, not defense secretary. But these are roles that are meant to often rise above politics. In this case, the very clear signal is that that won't be the case. These are loyalists who will report to Trump and will put Trump's interests above all else. We know that much. In Hegseth's case, again, in a very sort of classic Trump way, this is someone who is very televisual, knows how to speak directly to a camera, looks the part in Trump world in terms of, what he expects or wants a defense secretary to look like. I think for the rest of the world, these things aren't going to be too much of a concern, in part because many leaders around the world have figured out how to deal with Trump. They know him from the previous term. They understand that he's transactional. They also understand how to game that system a little bit.
In what way?
Well, for example, flattery works. So if you are able to tell Trump that a certain scenario, he personally has moved the needle, he tends to like that kind of discourse. He tends to, if presented with a scenario in which he can sell a clear win, if he can put his name on a new project or a new plan, he's more likely to say yes. I think there is now so much evidence from his 4 years in power and so many books that have now been written about Trump that, all of these leaders around the world and their policymakers and their teams, they've been poring over it for a long time. So in some senses, we shouldn't underestimate how prepared the rest of the world is for another Trump term. And also in some cases, Europe, for example, is terrified of the idea of a world without American support as a guarantee. Many parts of the world are not terrified. If you're in the global south, if you're India, if you're Nigeria, if you're Kenya, you actually want a transactional American president who is not going to lecture you about democracy and human rights and is going to sit down and be willing to make a deal. So it's a mixed picture, actually.
All right. Interesting perspective. Ravi Agrawal, the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy Magazine. Good to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.